So tomorrow we'll wake up and presumably, this is not necessarily the case, and we saw this in 2000, presumably we'll have the announcement of, even tonight, late at night, on who is going to be the next president of the United States. Now, this could go all the way into December to figure out who it is, of course, if you understand how the Electoral College works and how what happens if there's a tie, which is a possibility, which just means that we have to deal with it for several weeks more is all that means, and then one of the bad people will be president of the United States. But tomorrow, when we wake up and we have Mr. President-elect Trump or Madam President-elect Clinton or we don't know who the president-elect is yet. I just have a feeling, unless something very, very, very unusual, as in hadn't happened in our history, unless something very, very unusual happens, then tomorrow is going to be the beginning of more of the same. That's what we've got. I just want to say to you, I don't see a reason to panic. I don't think you have to flee. Well, I see we've got some Canadians online, and we have had some very famous people threaten to go to Canada if a certain person is elected. Which, when I saw some of those names, it just made me want to vote all the more in order to rid ourselves of some of these. But those of us, I speak mainly to a conservative biblical audience, and we for some reason we like to do fear mongering among conservatives. We like to paint doom and gloom, and I'm just convinced that tomorrow is going to be the beginning of more of the same. Now, the same is not good. The status quo we've got is not good at all. It's a downhill slide for morality. It's a downhill slide for biblical knowledge. It's a downhill slide for Judeo-Christian ethics. So it's not good. But in this election, I am convinced whichever one of the two is going to win this thing, whether we know it tonight or tomorrow or a month from now, whichever one it is, I can tell you there is no Messiah. He's not on the ballot. And it is not going to be that if one of these candidates is elected, the sun is going to shine more beautifully than it ever has before. The rains are going to come perfectly at just the right time. The desert is going to blossom. Wouldn't that be nice? But if you believe that, and you're from Taos, New Mexico, I'd say you've been smoking something, because that's not going to happen. It's going to be, unfortunately, more of the same. Now, just as there's no Messiah, I would also say in this election, there's no Antichrist. And as bad as it could be, and it might be, I don't know, but as bad as it could be, there's going to be a time when it gets worse. And we may be in for great days. We may be in for bad days. I have a feeling that we're in for days is what we're in. Some of them are going to be good. Some of them are going to be bad. But we're going to live. Now, part of what brings me to this is I do remember about 8 years ago when a fellow named Barack Obama was elected, and those of us who are conservatives were just very alarmed by this, some more than others. And we just thought, this is the last presidential election we ever had. They're sharpening the guillotines, and it's about to hit our neck, and we are not going to survive the next 4 years. And then it was 4 more years, and guess what? Here we are. We're healthy. We have jobs. We still have our home. We still go to our church freely. I still preach from the pulpit. Guess what? You know what it was? More of the same is what it is. I just think tomorrow, here's my advice for you tomorrow. When the sun comes up, take a deep breath and be calm and carry on. Whether it's President-elect Trump or President-elect Clinton, whatever it is, or we don't know who the President-elect is, we're a resilient nation, and we're a resilient people, and there have been, down through the ages, a lot of people, and even today, a lot of people who've got it much worse than we do. There are nations, even all around the United States, that have leaders who are worse than our leaders, and there are nations that have leaders that are better than our leaders, for that matter. But we really are we're going to survive here. through all of this, and I think that we don't have to cower in fear. Don't crawl under the bed tonight and not get out. Taking your stash of green beans and hope that you survive till Jesus comes. Rather, get up, go to work, meet your family, have lunch, hamburger preferably, and just enjoy and live and be a witness for Jesus Christ in these days that we have until the rapture. That's my commentary on the election. Now, one of the things that I think is important in U.S. elections anyway, and we often forget this, is that we're not just going for a presidential election. We're also going for a lot of local elections, and of course it varies depending on where you live, on who's running. And in my case, I had a congressman to vote for, and that congressman happens to, one of those that's running for the Republican seat happens to be a member of my church, and so I certainly wanted to go there and vote for him. And I'll go tonight to the watch party and see how those elections come about. It's a very, very, very uphill race, I would say that, but nonetheless. You had a congressman. If you live in the United States, your congressman was up for election, may have been contested, may not have been contested. Some of you have senators, governors, other things. Now, I think that these local elections, we forget that they are of the utmost importance. It's in these local elections that the fabric of our society is put together. And it's the House of Representatives, for example, that holds the purse strings and has just a tremendous amount of power. So as you vote today or next election cycle, really pay attention to some of those local elections. If you have city council elections or federal, state elections, these are very, very, very important and probably affect you more on a day-to-day basis than does the President of the United States. So real important stuff. Propositions, constitutional amendments in your various states, bond amendments, all these kind of things can really make a big difference in the day-to-day affairs that you live. So don't forget those elections and how important they are, just really of the utmost importance. Well, there's my comment on the election. Be calm. Take your, as I see on the comments, your Jim Baker survival food and save it for another day. I don't think you're going to need it tomorrow. And, there will be, almost no doubt, some conservative commentators, however it goes, that are just going to tell us how bad it's going to be. And we almost always, in our mind, make the future worse than it ever turns out to be. There's an old statement I like. It says, don't build bridges, let me try to get this right here. Don't build bridges over waters that don't flow through valleys that don't exist. And that's sometimes what we're doing. We're trying to get over this water that doesn't even flow in a valley that doesn't even exist. We're dreaming up just a terrible future. And how often does the future come out as bad as you thought it was going to? Someday it's going to. I know about the tribulation. And yet, I also know about the rapture, and that is our blessed hope and the only hope that we have. Well, let's move on from the election, and let's pray that tomorrow we'll be able to move on from the election. That'll be a blessing as well, won't it? I am friends with one of the national commentators, anchorman on TV, and I told him I was praying for him today for clarity and confidence and cohesion and quick thinking. And there's a lot of people that are involved in these elections that we think about or may not think about, that they need our prayers and our encouragement as well during this time, in addition to those candidates. Well, a related question, but not having to do with the government, and I'll certainly take your questions or comments for those of you who are watching live, but you can go ahead and put those in. But a related question is one that came in on Facebook, and the question was, is America under judgment? Is America under judgment? I, again, have no doubt, whoever wins this thing, whether it's Trump or Clinton, I have no doubt that tomorrow some Christian commentator out there is going to tell us about how America is under judgment, and that's why we've got what we've got. I think there's There is a reason that people say this, that Christian commentators say this, often especially right-wing commentators, and I promise you, especially if Clinton, who is on the left, if she is elected, those on the right who are Christians, many of them are going to say, this is God's judgment upon America. I remember a few years ago, someone was talking about women in leadership, and I didn't necessarily agree with this person, by the way, but the person was looking back through the Old Testament and saying whenever God had a woman in leadership, it's because he was judging his people. And the implication then, if a nation has a woman in leadership, then God is judging. That was the sermon that was given that I happened to have had to listen to that day. The problem is they made a principle, or shall we even say a doctrine, out of a historic anecdote from the Scripture. And you take leaders like Deborah or Esther, and you say, well, God wasn't really dealing directly with them, and so he gave them a woman, and you begin building this doctrine of judgment. I think it's not the way to understand the work of God throughout all time. It's the way to understand what God was doing at that particular point in time. And by the way, those particular passages that I mentioned do not mention that it is God's judgment there. That's reading into the text more than it is reading out of the text. But if Clinton's elected, then and she probably has the benefit of the doubt at this point. It's certainly not a sure thing. But if Clinton's elected, tomorrow morning, the right-wingers will say, America is under judgment, and God is judging. He's cursed America. Now, I happen to think that we live in a day, a dispensation, in which you and I and us collectively, and I mean that Christians and non-Christians, we make our own decisions. That is to say, we make our own bed, and then sometimes we have to sleep in that bed. And if it may be that America is under judgment, but it's just going to be the judgment of the voters that America is under. Now, I don't think God judges nation states today. And you say, well, he judged Nineveh, he judged Sodom, he judged Gomorrah, and all these other places that you could look to and say God judged Israel, God judged Judah, and he did judge all those places. But again, you're taking a historical anecdote from the Scripture and applying it to today, and I don't think that's valid. I think today God deals with individuals, with me and you. And in this dealing with individuals, he does it on the basis of offering the gift of salvation by grace through faith. And he says, here it is, whoever wants it may come and take it. And it is neither male nor female, slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile, but we are given this opportunity by grace through faith. So, is America under judgment? No, it's not under judgment. The nations will come to the judgment, but not in this age of grace. Now, America might be, can I say, stupid? America might be ridiculously stupid, even. And Canada and Mexico and all the other nations of the world might be that way as well. And we're going to get what we ask for, in a sense, and we're going to get what we've produced as well. And I think that's what we have in the elections today is the characters that are running for president of the United States are just products of American society. This is what America has produced beginning in the 1960s, going up today. How could you expect anything different? It's only in a small subculture of America that you would get someone that has a biblical point of view, a Judeo-Christian point of view. And the populace of America would not understand that or agree with that. And that's true for my Canadian friends, Australian friends, and others who are here as well through all of this. And some of the comments on here, I want to back up and check and make sure I get up to date here. And Linda speaks about some people live through a self-fulfilling prophecy and make their life worse. And I do think that there's a degree in that which that is right. And we do create our own future. And we can create that future in a number of different ways. Gary says, Canaan experienced some level of judgment by Israel. Their sins had not reached its fullness for Abraham to inherit the land. And that's very true. That when the sins came to their full, then judgment came upon the land of Canaan, and as the scripture says. And I think that we have in this day, I'm going to use a kind of a broad brush here, but we live in the times of the Gentiles. And until the fullness of the Gentiles come in, this thing's just going to rock along. Now, when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, then there is judgment that is going to come. And so perhaps you could say America is building up some future judgment, and that might be accurate. But America currently being under judgment, I think, is where we disagree. The Hurricane Katrina was mentioned on here. And, again, the right-wing commentators like to come in, and when there is something just absolutely terrible, like a hurricane that comes in, very often, they say, well, this is the judgment of God. And they often come to, the president said this, and so God sent a hurricane. Or that mayor did this, and so God sent a hurricane. And the problem is, when Hurricane Katrina, for example, came, it hit churches, it hit godly people, it hit seminaries, it hit the good and the bad. And not only that, but when you have wonderful weather, guess what? It hits Satanists and Wiccans and atheists and all. I mean, it rains on the just and on the unjust, so to speak. And we have this issue that the world is kind of working, and God has given us dominion of the world. And we're not doing a very good job with it, I admit, but I don't think we have anyone to blame but ourselves when politically things go bad. Because we're the ones that allow that and that create those kind of things. I just thinking of the words, and I should have memorized this better when I was in the 10th grade, but do you remember the words? When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one group of people to separate themselves from another people. Of course, that's the Declaration of Independence, roughly stated. When we get a political situation that is horrible and we allow it, then hey, we have to live with it. It's our own judgment that comes about. So, is America into judgment? I don't think so. And Fred says, are you getting into dominionism? And let me say, yes, but not like that. I do think that God has given us dominion. The problem is that the dominionism is the idea that we're going to be able to usher in the dominion of the Messiah. We're going to be able to usher in the dominion of the second Adam, or that is, we're going to be able to conquer the earth in order to establish the kingdom. It's the same thing as postmillennialism, and I just don't think we're that good. I think we're going to fail every time. I think that you and I have an obligation to have dominion, and that is to speak up, to try to do something, whether it's dominion of our own little flower bed or it's dominion of in our community. We ought to work hard, work with our hands, try to make a living, try to make a better life for ourselves and our family. And carry that out. Neil asks the question, can you comment on the shadow government? The truth is, I can't comment much. I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, though I think some of the conspiracies might just happen to be right. And the issue of a shadow government, I think that I'm not sure I have enough confidence in the human ability to, one, keep a secret, two, to organize itself that well to have much of a shadow government. Now, that said, I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that we don't know about. And if we knew about it, we would say, that's the push behind all of this. That's what's really happening and taking place. Now, I could be completely wrong on all of that particular issue, but who knows? I see Linda's put on her tinfoil hat, and joking there, of course. But America under judgment? I don't think so, other than under our own judgment. And one of the reasons that this is so often given is because there are a lot of Calvinists out there who believe that everything is appointed by God. Absolutely everything that happens is of God. And I've spoken on that before. I totally disagree with that. I think we're going to choose our own president. We're choosing our own president today, and we're going to have to live with him or her. And this is not the appointment of God that is given. God has appointed authorities, but that is to say the position of the family, the position of the church, the position of the government, those kind of principalities, if you will, are appointed by God or ordained of God. But the actual individual in there, I think, takes place in the course of human events as that all takes place. Well, let me speak to another issue that came in, or a question that came in, totally unrelated to any of this. Jerry sent in a question, said, years ago when I was saved, I was taught that the Christian must make straight his past life as much as possible. What do you believe the Christian's responsibility is as far as making restitution for past sins to those who are wronged? Now, appreciate you sending the question, Jerry. And it's a great question. What if you become a Christian and you've done people wrong in the past? How much should you go back there and get it fixed and make restitution for that? Someone could give the example of, who was it? Zacchaeus, the tax collector, who said, I'm going to go back and repay fourfold all that anyone I have cheated. And of course, that would make a great proof text for this. That passage, by the way, does not teach that you should make restitution. It says this is what Zacchaeus did. Got my Z guys mixed up. This is what Zacchaeus did. And don't make a doctrine out of a historical anecdote. You'll mess up in so many ways there. And somewhere along the way online, I've got a sermon on that would speak about the problems you get if you make Zacchaeus your template on how to be saved. Now, to this question, should you go back and make restitution for past sins? I'm going to say my answer is it depends. It depends. First of all, there's the question, how far in the past should you go? Because there's not a one of us as pure as the driven snow, right? And you look back and you say, when I was in the 7th grade, I went into the Piggly Wiggly store and I grabbed a piece of bubble gum and I cheated them out of 28 cents and I got to go back and figure the interest rate on all that since the time I was in the 7th grade and make it right with the Piggly Wiggly, right? You'd be busy and you'd be broke is what would happen there. So how far past? Now, the same way if a person is saved and they say, last week, last month, last year, I did somebody so wrong and I see that now and I'm convicted of that now. Probably those things that are in the more recent past, and I can't put a line on that, but in the more recent past, as you look back as a saved individual, then you say that was just wrong. Whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, probably ought to be something that you ought to go back and say, hey, can we get this right? I owe you something. Maybe financially I owe you something if I cheated you. But I certainly owe you something in terms of my apologies. The second, I would say, how detailed do you want to get? Again, we've wronged people in the past, and we have to be careful not just to go back and relive those sins, relive it, dig it up, take the scalpel and try to dig under and dig into to find every little wrong that we have done. God is forgiven, separated as far as the east is from the west, and to try to pry into our past and make all those things happen, I think is challenging. Third thing I'd say is, how public is it? Is this something everybody knows about? Or is it something that, one person knows about, and we might need to go to one person? Now, here's what I'd say, I think, in the bottom line. If it hinders a relationship today, then try to get it right. If you've got something in your past, whether it was when you're saved or you're not saved, that is hindering a relationship, then maybe you can get it right. You have to weigh that and consider that in the wisdom of God and perhaps some counsel from others. But if you look at it and you say, a year ago I wasn't saved, now I'm saved. I see what I did back there a year ago, and it was wrong, and I feel uncomfortable. If I see them coming down the sidewalk, I want to turn around and run the other way. And I don't want that kind of relationship. I want to go and try to get it right. You may not be able to get it right, by the way, but you can certainly just say, I'm sorry, I did what is wrong. If you can forgive me, I would appreciate that. I owe you $10. Here's your $10. What you do with it now is your responsibility, but God bless you is my wish upon you. I think sometimes that can be very good. However, sometimes that would just pour salt in a wound that has already healed. I personally am not one that thinks you got to go, in order to have some Pharisaical self-righteousness, you got to go and try to make something right that's actually just going to hurt some people in trying to make it right. And there are some things that have healed over, and as we say sometimes, best just to let a sleeping dog lie and leave that thing alone, because sometimes it rips that Band-Aid off, and I don't see that does any good. Now again, there's some Pharisees out there who say, no, I want to be right with them and with God. I'm just not sure that's actually what's making it right. Now, the third thing, and this is the one that I think is most important on these just general principles, on going back and making something right in the past. And that is, if what you're trying to make right involves more people than just you and them, then I'm going to say, don't go back and try to make it right. Now, let me just, I'm going to make up an example. Let's suppose you and your buddies were out, and all of you got involved in, some sort of drunken brawl, and you broke, Widow Smith's window. And you go to Widow Smith and say, hey, me and my buddies, we were in a drunken brawl, and we broke your window. And it was Neil and Fred and Marius and, Linda was driving the car. And in fact, she's the one that picked up the rock. Now, that's confessing for other people. And don't get into confessing for other people. If you got to make something right, then make it right for you and them, because God hadn't convicted them. It's you don't know where they are in that. You might go to them and say, hey, I think you ought to do this, but don't throw somebody under the bus in trying to make it right. Again, you might feel some Pharisaical self-righteousness after it's all over with. But I am very much a believer, sorry about the phone ringing there, very much a believer that you don't need to confess for other people. That would be the wrong thing to do. Well, I believe that we are out of time here today, and reading some of the comments there, I'm getting a little giggle out of that, but thank you for being here with us live today. For those of you who watched live, others perhaps watching the archives, and we appreciate you tuning in later. And I'll be teaching live again 6:15 p.m. Mountain Time on Wednesday night, and 7 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time on Thursday night. It is Election Day. We're praying for our country. We're praying for our future, and we're going to live a simple life and work with our hands and bless our families and our communities and our churches, and pray that God is blessed by it all. Next time we come together, I'll save some of these other questions we have about fasting for spiritual growth, perhaps, and some of the crazy teaching that's out there about fasting. Find us on Facebook, Randy White Ministries, facebook.com/Randy White Ministries. Give us a like and a share. We always appreciate that. And until next time, I'm Dr. Randy White, and this has been Ask the Theologian. I hope you'll go to the Scriptures and compare these answers to the Word of God and ask the Scriptures if these things are right. Until next time, God bless you.